skeptical, or spiritual persuasion of any kind. I myself am a member of this church, so I obviously align as a Christian, but for the purpose of a fair exchange, I must behave as a neutral enforcer between our two opponents, John Feeks and Darren Kay. Darren and John call one another friend, so I trust the enforcer is just a cool-sounding term that I like, and that the role of moderator is all that will be required. This will not be a brawl of sorts, but rather a friendly exchange with an express purpose of engaging your minds as we discuss this important topic, expecting that we will all treat one another with respect, regardless of controversy or disagreement within the audience. There will be a Q&A session afterwards for those that are anxiously wiggling in their seats. The question is, though, how should we live our lives? This question entails everything in the major branch of philosophy known as ethics. This area of rational inquiry is more than just a fascinating mental exercise. How we address the question of ethics will have enormous practical implications not only for us, but for our society as well. Another quick but important note following the debate and the Q&A, and I hope we can all share something in common, is a love for fellowship and for a large variety of pie and ice cream, which I would encourage everyone to stay for, of course. And a very special thanks to the ladies who work so hard on these pies. This evening does not involve the use of programs. However, there is an order to the debate, which is posted up here. And our speakers will be expected to adhere to very specific times. It is not intended to be rude if I have to cut in at any point where things go on too long. I guess this is where I cue the enforcer role. Now, to introduce our two rational combatants. In this corner, arguing for the proposition that Christianity is ethically superior to secularism, Mr. John Feeks, pastor of New Life Sanctuary Church. He earned his Master of Religion degree from Columbia Evangelical Seminary with emphasis on religion, philosophy, and divine revelation. Since 2000, he has traveled speaking on the rational defense for the Christian faith. Since 2007, John has served as adjunct professor of world religions, countercult studies, and apologetics at Miller College of the Bible at both the Saskatchewan and BC campuses. He also teaches on the subject of creation science. And as mentioned, he's also the lead pastor here, has been since 2014. He resides in Winnipeg with his wife of over 20 years, Lindy. They have 4 children, Alicia, Samuel, Madison, and the youngest, Marcus, most of which I believe are here in attendance today. Pastor John's journey with the Lord began many years ago in a gym, having been introduced by another gym patron. I mention this because I often join him at Lindy at the gym during the week, where I now get to see John witnessing to others at the gym, so it's kind of full circle and very neat to see. So, welcome, John. And in my other corner here is Darren Kay. Darren is an agnostic atheist, writer and researcher who is currently working on a book, The Case for Zeus, which explores beliefs and their justifications. He has a YouTube page showing his many dialogues with people of many faiths and has grown to be close friends with some of the most influential philosophers, people like Matt Dillahunty, Richard Carrier, Ozymandias, John Loftus, and Christopher DiCarlo. So, welcome, Darren. Now, we will proceed with the opening remarks, and we just hope that we have a good and enjoyable debate. So each will be given 5 minutes, and as I said, the format is listed up there. John Feeks will start with his opening remarks.
Make sure this thing is on here. Okay. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for coming out here tonight to explore this very important topic together. And I just want to thank you, Darren, for agreeing. This is round 3 for us. And most of all, I want to thank the Lord Jesus, who called me to believe in him so many years ago and has changed the trajectory of my life forever. And it's infinitely for the better. Tonight, I want to defend the proposition that Christianity is ethically superior to secularism. And to get the ball rolling here, I'll just start with a little story here, a little analogy to get our thinking juices going in our brains, but this is a picture of my son Marcus from a few years ago. Marcus is doing a dot-to-dot puzzle. And dot-to-dot puzzles are designed for a purpose. There's intentionality behind the puzzle. That means there's a right way to connect the dots and to interpret the image. And we all know that. That's a very mundane sort of thing. That's pretty low level. But now Darren has 2 cats, I think. Now, Darren, what if a cat jumped on the table, knocked a bottle of ink over, and splashed ink blots all over the paper? Well, these are random. There's no design to this. There's no intentionality. And therefore, there's no right way to connect and interpret the dots, is there? In fact, it would be downright silly to correct another person's connections and interpretations on a bunch of random ink blots on a page. Wouldn't that be the case? Well, I want to ask a question tonight. What about human experience? Is there a right way to connect and interpret our experiences? I think our debate this evening sort of assumes that there is. In fact, just about every atheist I've ever talked to has said something like this. This is William Kingdom Clifford, a math professor. He said, "It is wrong always, everywhere, and for everyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence." So for this man, there is a right way to look at the world. There's a right way to connect experiences and reach conclusions. In fact, every atheist book I've ever read says something very similar. There's a right way to do this. And yet, how can this be when these very same people, like Richard Dawkins, tell us that the universe has no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference? Dan Barker, the atheist Dan Barker, says you and I are like ants or rats or like pieces of broccoli. There's no value to our species. We're no different than a piece of broccoli in the cosmic sense. The physics professor, Roger S. Jones, says that the whole universe is just completely random, accidental, and meaningless. The atheist Will Provine said there are no gods, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning to life, and no free will for humans. He says there are no moral or ethical laws that exist. There are no absolute guiding principles for human society. The universe cares nothing for us, and we have no ultimate meaning in life. The existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre said, everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist. He says, on the other hand, if God does not exist, we are not provided with any values or commands that could legitimize our behavior. So on the atheist view, human experience is the same as random ink spots. Just connect them how you want, interpret them however you like. There's no intentionality, there's no right way to do it, and yet the atheist wants to say there is a right way to do this. And he's got that right way, and you better listen to him. How can there be a moral obligation to do this? The secularist view of reality undercuts his claims concerning rationality and morality. Secularism, I think, is therefore patently irrational and ethically bankrupt. I want to argue tonight that Christianity fares much better. On the Christian view, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. There's intentionality behind the created order, behind every fact in the created order. On the Christian worldview, there is a right way to connect our experiences and to interpret them. God provides the needed objective rational standards and the moral obligations. And so tonight I want to explore this with you in much more detail. I want to argue that Christianity is ethically superior to secularism because God is, first of all, the necessary foundation for objective moral values and duties, and 2, that Christianity is, in the last analysis, intrinsically ethical, while secularism is only ethically neutral. There is no right way to connect and interpret our experiences on this atheist worldview. So Christianity is, I would say, in the very nature of the case, ethically superior to secularism, and I look forward tonight to exploring this with you. So thank you so much, and God bless.
Thank you, John.
Test. There we go.
Oh, your computer. There we go. There you go, my friend.
Excellent. Ladies, gentlemen, comrades, friends, welcome. Thank you for inviting me back here for a third interesting debate here tonight. Just wanted to quickly thank all the organizers for inviting me back. It's a privilege and an honor to speak with you this evening. So John, Lindy for the pies, all the other ladies that helped out, our moderator, Dan, if we can give him a quick round of applause, that'd be great. I do have a YouTube channel. If you guys want to check out some of the dialogues that I do have, you're more than welcome to do that. And I was recently at an Alpha group. Some of you guys might have heard of this. And they were talking about prayer, and they said, Darren, we can convince you that there is a God. We know that you're an atheist, but we can prove it to you. Look, it says, truly, I tell you that if two of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it'll be done by my Father in heaven. I said, perfect. All right. Then I'd love to win the debate that there is no God. Didn't go so well, but that's fine, because the question tonight is, can we be good without God? How many here, if you found out there wasn't a God, would go out and rape and steal and murder tomorrow if you found there was none? Okay, perfect. I think we're on the same page. I rest my case. But we have to understand that every situation is quite different. We talk about situational ethics, and the Pope himself even says, well, there's no situation that we need to look at. If the book says it is a certain way, it has to be done that way. But then we have to open up other ideas. Is it ever morally permissible to sacrifice an innocent life to arrive at a destination quicker? Now, at first glance, this question seems appalling. We'd say, of course not. We're not going to ever do that. But last year, there was about 40,000 deaths on North American roads. If we could lower those speed limit laws by, let's say, 10%, and save 10% of those lives, that's 4,000 innocent lives. That could be you, that could be your family, it could be your friends. Would you do it? Instead of arriving at a destination in 20 minutes, now you'd take 22 minutes. Well, I think we'd all agree that would be the case. But why stop at 10%? Why not 20%? Why not 50%? Why not go the speed limit of a bumper car and save 40,000 innocent lives? At some point, this doesn't even just apply to roads. This applies to planes and trains and the air we breathe and the food we eat. Any form of risk that can cause pain or suffering or even death, at some point we have to say, we have to draw a line. And where and why? Imagine that there's a trolley car that's barreling down the road. It's going to hit 5 workers. And you are at a switch, and you can hit the switch and divert the track so that it only hits 1. Well, 90% of people or so would say that they would divert the track. Why? Because 1 life for 5 lives. Obviously, that makes sense. But now if we switch the scenario just a little bit, now we're standing at the top of a bridge, and there's a rather large man standing next to us, and we have the opportunity to push the man over and stop the train. Again, we're changing 1 life for 5. But in this case, the majority of people would say, no, I wouldn't push the man. What's the difference? Let's take it 1 step further. Imagine that you're a doctor and you've got 5 patients in your waiting room that each need a different organ, and they're going to die without it. And there's a healthy man that comes in looking for a checkup, and you could, unbeknownst to him, kill him and harvest all of his organs and save the other 5. Well, now we get even to a more tricky area of ethics. Joseph Fletcher, he came up with the idea of situational ethics, that every situation needs to be observed completely differently. He was a priest and later became an atheist and won the Humanist Association for the Humanist of the Year. And what he says is that the morality of an action strictly depends upon that situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Okay, we will now have the presentation of the cases. John, for the case for Christian ethics.
Is that going to work? Well, I hope it does. Do we have pictures? Hey. All right, friends. Okay, so I'd like to just give you my opening arguments here, and hope I don't put anybody to sleep. Please stay awake and think carefully about this. Kind of important. We're asking the question, how should we live our lives? And it's a big question. I'll be talking today about objective moral values and duties. By objective, I mean wholly apart from human opinion. By values, I'm talking about good and bad. in a moral sense, and by duties I mean right and wrong. I want to say tonight, I want to defend the position that only Christian theism can provide an adequate foundation for objective moral values and duties. Let's think about this together. On Christian theism, can we account for objective moral values, good and bad? I say that we can. God looks down at the world. This is it's a cartoony depiction, but you can imagine God looking at the world, and he observes the world, and he decides what's good and what's bad around here in a moral sense. Now, how does he do that? Is he measuring the earth against some standard out there in space, a standard according to which he himself is subject? Well, that can't be the case, because then God would not be ultimate. And on classic Christian theology, God is ultimate. Nor can we say that God is arbitrary, that he just sort of rolls the dice and he decides, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, I guess mugging old ladies is wrong today. That's arbitrary, and God is not arbitrary. No, we want to say that God's very character is the very locus and paradigm of moral goodness. God is by nature loving, just, generous, merciful, and so on. All those things that you and I would want to recognize as being morally commendable, that is God by nature. So those things which are in conformity to his good and just and noble character, he calls good. That's how God judges the world. And so on Christian theism, God provides an appropriate ground for objective moral values. But what about objective moral duties, the things we ought to do, things that are either right or wrong? Well, ought, the sense of ought, arises from imperatives given by a competent authority. And we just can't imagine a more competent authority than God. On classic Christian theology, God exemplifies maximal excellence in every imaginable state of affairs. God is omniscient, he is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. That is to say, he is morally perfect. So he is the competent authority, and his commands are necessary expressions of his morally perfect character. We want to say on classic Christian theology, according to the Bible, God is love. That's God's character, love. And throughout all eternity, love relationship has been exemplified between the members of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Jesus said, when he was asked, what's the greatest commandment? He said, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. He said, on these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. Paul says, love works no ill to his neighbor, therefore love is the fulfilling of the law. Now, I predict tonight, at some point, we're going to talk about the Mosaic Law. I want to say that the Mosaic Law was transitory. It was temporary. It was not permanent. The Old Testament looks ahead to a New Testament when the Mosaic Law would be done away. The Mosaic Law was the best prescription for that time, people, and place. It was an incremental move back to God's holy, perfect ideal. The purpose of the Mosaic Law was to restrain evil and to expose our sinful condition and to point to the Savior. But friends, the Mosaic Law has died. And I have to say this because I think there's a lot of atheists out there who claim to have read the Bible who don't grasp this. But let's explore it. Colossians chapter 2 says the handwriting of ordinances that was against us, i.e. the Mosaic Law, has been nailed to the cross. It's been taken out of the way. Scholar Albert Barnes says the Jewish ceremonial law was nailed to the cross. The requirements of the Mosaic Law are abolished. The Expositor's Bible Commentary says the cross of Christ is the death of the law. Scholar Marvin R. Vincent says the law was crucified with Jesus. A.T. Robertson says when Christ was crucified, the law was nailed to his cross. And I can give you extensive scholarly bibliography on this. In Ephesians 2:14, beginning in 14, it says that God has abolished in Christ's flesh the law of commandments contained in ordinances, having slain the enmity thereby. The great churchman John Calvin said, after the death of the law, Christ received us, that is, he joined us, when loosed from the law, to himself. And the great theologian Charles Hodge says that the law was our first husband. We were bound to satisfy its commands, but the law being dead, that is to say, fulfilled in Christ, we are free from the obligation of obedience to it. In the book of Hebrews, chapter 8, we're told that old covenant was made old and decays and it's vanishing away. That sentiment is echoed in 2 Corinthians, the 3rd chapter. It was a ministration of death written and engraved on stone, says Paul. He says that the new covenant is a ministration of the Spirit, and it's much more glorious. He says, if that which is done away was glorious, much more that which remains is glorious. Paul says to the Roman believers, Christ is the end of the law for righteousness to everyone that believes. Look at the language, friends. Paul says we're dead to sin. That means unresponsive to sin. Then he turns around and he says, you're dead to the law. You're free from sin. You're free from the law. You're not under sin. You're not under the law. The priesthood, the sacrificial system, circumcision, dietary restrictions, the Sabbath day, the tabernacle and temple programs, so central to the Jewish religious system under the Mosaic covenant, have all been altered and done away with. That is just classic Christian theology. Today, love is the fulfilling of the law, permanent, eternally exemplified in the character and nature of God, and all his wise moral commands are reflections of that character. So I would say objective moral duties have an appropriate grounding in God. Notice also, please, if we're going to tell somebody they ought to do something, that sort of implies that they can do that thing. You say, you really ought to help that baby cross the street or whatever. Well, that implies you can actually get up and help that child. I mean, you're not confined to a bed or an iron lung or something. And see, on classic Christian theology, this makes a lot of sense. On classic Christian theology, we are substance dualists. We believe that a person has a physical, material body, yes, but you also have a non-material soul spirit. You have a non-material nature, a soul, which supports a complete set of rational faculties, which we call a person. So your non-material mind is interacting with a physical brain. This dualist interactionism is going on, and this means that we are not strongly determined by physics and chemistry and environment. You make real choices. And that just sort of seems to agree with our basic sensibilities on this. You tell somebody you ought to do something, it sort of implies they can. They're not just meat machines being pushed around. And I think this makes perfect sense. This sort of comports well with our common sense, everyday experiences on things. But how about secularism? How about atheistic secularism? Can we account for objective moral values? Well, John Steinrucken, an atheist, he says those who doubt the effect of religion on morality should seriously ask the question, just what are the immutable laws of secularism? Be prepared to answer, if you're honest, that such laws simply do not exist. Right. Remember Richard Dawkins, he told us that the universe is a place with no purpose and no evil and no good. Nothing but pitiless indifference. Now that's funny because then he'll turn around and write a book telling us how evil Christianity is. Isn't that funny? Michael Roos says morality is just a biological adaptation. Ethics, he says, are illusory. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning, he says, is illusory. I would say that atheistic secular systems, ethical systems, are, in the first place, arbitrary. And Darren was not invited here to offer us something arbitrary. He was supposed to tell us that secularism is ethically superior to Christianity, and I'd like to hear the case. I'm waiting for this, because I predict he's just going to come up with his own chosen ethical system, quite arbitrarily chosen, and he's going to try to defend that. I predict he's going to want us to assume human equality. But you see, Darren is a Darwinist. And on Darwinism, all we are physical objects. And if there's one thing we're not, dear friends, it's equal. In every measurable physical characteristic, we're not equal. In fact, Friedrich Nietzsche, another secularist, he said the doctrine of equality is the most poisonous poison. See, he's trying to be as consistent as he can be as a Darwinist. Elaine Pagels, a scholar who's not a Christian, she admits it was Christians who forged what would later become the Western ideas of freedom and the infinite value of each human life. We're hearing a lot today about human rights. I'm all for human rights. I think I'm more for human rights than my secularist neighbor because I can account for human rights. And we're going to get into this today. But even our Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms opens with a nice phrase, whereas Canada is founded upon principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Man, it's good to be a Canadian. I'm more of a Canadian than Darren over here. See, whoever wrote that, they were thinking it through, weren't they? This is Marcello Pera, philosopher and politician and atheist, served as president of the Italian Senate from 01 to 06. He says, just as the laws of nature refer to an order inscribed on the world, the rights of human beings refer to a God who has stamped his image upon man. And this is clearly the Christian vision of God, creator of the natural and moral world. He wrote a book, Why We Should Call Ourselves Christians. He says Europe is finished if we reject our Judeo-Christian heritage. And he's not an intellectual slouch either. I would say that God alone can account for legitimate human rights and their relationship to objective moral values. But what about objective moral duties on the secularist view? Well, Richard Dawkins tells us that we are just machines for propagating DNA. And the propagation, he says, of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living. Wonderful, Richard. You've just made rapists everywhere very happy. Right? I mean, what kind of nightmare idea is this that he's got? Well, he's getting this from Charles Darwin. Darwin's book, The Descent of Man, published way back in 1871, I believe. He says this: if men were reared under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like the worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. See, this could have gone very differently, couldn't it? The point is, there's just no objective moral values or duties on the atheist worldview. How could there be? Human experience is just like random ink blots. Connect them how you want. There's no right way to do this. There's no right way to live. It's arbitrary. It's being smuggled in here today, I think, as something objective that we should all strive for, that we should strive for, as though we had a choice on the atheist view. Richard Dawkins says science has no methods for deciding what is ethical. It is a matter for individuals and for society. It's for individuals? Really? Well, here we got Stalin and Pol Pot and Mao and Hitler and bin Laden. If it's up to individuals, on what basis now are we going to judge the free choices of those individuals? Really, if it's up to individuals, you've just given up any principled objection against the actions or philosophies of another individual. He mentions society. Well, society decides. Oh, does it? Then you've just condemned all the social reformers. Do you think that's a moral thing to do? You think Martin Luther King Jr. was a bad person? You think he was immoral? Or Rosa Parks or somebody? They stood outside society and condemned society for being unjust. Dawkins is not a great philosopher, I'm sad to say. And I don't think he's thought these issues through. Where do moral obligations come from, dear friends? Why do we commend certain behavior? On the secularist, atheistic, materialist view, it just makes no sense to me. Francis Crick, an atheist, a materialist, he says, your joys and your sorrows, your memories and your ambitions, your sense of personal identity and free will are in fact no more than the behavior of a vast assembly of nerve cells and their associated molecules. You're nothing but a pack of neurons, says Francis Crick. So on his view, human beings are just electrical chemical machines. You just do what you do. The only way you can do these things in accordance with the laws of physics and chemistry. Now, how about that? So then why are we condemning certain behavior as morally wrong? Why are we commending certain behavior as morally right? I was at the Air Force Museum at Dayton, Ohio, and they had a big display there on the Bataan Death March. Maybe you're familiar with that, where the Japanese forced Allied soldiers to march some incredible distance, I think it was like 60 miles or more, and men were dropping and dying. And this man here, Major General Robert Preston Taylor, the chaplain, a Christian, he would stop and he would pick men up off the ground because if they stayed there, they'd be shot. And he was beaten repeatedly for doing that, but he miraculously survived the ordeal, and he received the Silver Cross for his sacrifice. Now, who here really believes he deserved that medal? I think he deserved that medal. Why? Because he could have done otherwise. He could have been self-seeking. He could have just protected his own. But no, he was helping his fellow man, and he deserved that. We don't give the projector a medal for displaying images on the screen here, and it's another electrical chemical machine, isn't it? I want to say that neither human rights nor objective moral values and duties would exist if atheism were true. And yet I think deep down we know that these things do exist. There is a right way to live. There's a right way to think. Christianity is ethically superior to secularism because, first of all, Christianity is intrinsically ethical. Number two, secularism is only ethically neutral, I would say, and we're going to get into that. Secular ethics, in the last analysis, are arbitrary. There's no rational justification for the ethical systems of the secularist. Secularists, you're going to find tonight, I predict, they will promote Christian values and duties. They'll talk about things like love, equality, freedom, responsibility, and justice. What do any of those things have to do with molecules in motion? How do you tell molecules in motion to be fair, or to love one another, or to be forgiving, or kind, or to be empathetic? See, Darren has to run over to my worldview. He has to take intellectual and moral capital from us, from the Christian, and then scurry back over to his own worldview and try to use those things as weapons against us. And that's not right. I predict you're going to see that tonight. Lastly, I'd say there's the testimony of history. The testimony of secularism has been abysmal. The Darwinist, the secularist, ends up devaluing human life in the final analysis. From secularism comes racism, oppression, mass murder, moral relativism, and it's been a real hindrance to intelligent scientific research. History professor Pat Johnson tells us that the bloodiest century in recorded history has been the 20th century. He says most of the people who have died as a result of war have done so in the 20th century, and the history professor says most of the killing was done in the name of secular ideologies. Hitler, Stalin, Mao, all these ideologies are based on atheistic systems, and we'll talk more about that yet tonight. The testimony of history concerning Christianity is much more positive. It's the Christians that formed the first hospitals and the first well-organized charity programs. It's Christians in the modern age that abolished slavery. It's the Christians that fostered the belief in education for everybody. It's Christians that got the whole scientific enterprise off the ground. It's Christians that created an environment of free enterprise and a strong work ethic. Not like the socialist regimes, these secular socialist regimes where the government swoops in and takes everything that you work for. What's the incentive to work in a regime like that? And finally, it's the Christian Bible and the premises found in the Bible that work together to move in people's hearts, to promote and protect strong families, the very basic societal unit in our culture. And when those things erode, you're going to see the collapse of the Western world. So once again, Christianity, intrinsically ethical, while secularism is ethically neutral. And we'll see that. Secular ethics are, I would say, arbitrary and therefore irrational. Secularists like Darren are going to be using moral capital from the Christian worldview because there is no metaphysical resources on his own worldview to talk about morality. And finally, there is the positive testimony of history on the Christian side and a black, abysmal, and I say nightmarish historical record on the secular side. Thank you so much for your patience, and God bless you.
Thank you, John.
Good? Awesome? Perfect. There's almost 1 billion people starving without enough food. About the same without water. And over 1/3 of the world's population right now has not enough sanitation. There's hundreds of millions of child laborers being forced to work in deplorable conditions. And diseases that are plaguing mankind. This one in particular, the guinea worm, usually in children, has meter-like worms that come out of every area of the body. Every minute, there's 21 children under the age of 5 that are dying. That means that by the time that I finish this sentence, there's some unlucky few children that are dying in pain and anguish while their parents pray as hard as they might. No answer will come. If you could save a child in a shallow pond, would you do it? Because if God answers prayers and intervenes, why doesn't he? So who causes this evil? Who causes all this suffering? Well, we have an answer. Just look at the Bible. Inside the Bible it says, I gave you empty stomachs in every city, and lack of bread in every town, yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. I also withheld the rain from you when the harvest was 3 months away. People staggered from town to town for water, but didn't get enough to drink. Many times I struck your gardens and vineyards, destroying them with blight and mildew. Locusts devoured your fig trees and olive trees, declares the Lord. I sent plagues among you, as I did in Egypt. I killed your young men with a sword. I filled your nostrils with the stench of these camps. Yet you have not returned to me, declares the Lord. God's telling us who's bringing all this pain, evil, and suffering. He's telling us who's not giving us enough food to eat, who's not giving enough water to drink. He's telling us who's killing our young men and women. In Isaiah it says, I form the light, I create the darkness, I make peace, and I create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Let's talk a little bit about justice. C.S. Lewis is a famous Christian writer, and in his book, Mere Christianity, he writes, with regards to Jesus and justice, he says, all of us can understand a man who forgives offenses among himself. You tread on my toe, I forgive you. You steal my money, I forgive you. But what should we make of a man who himself unrobbed and untrodden on, who announced he forgave you for treading on other men's toes and stealing other men's money? These words would imply what I can only regard as silliness and conceit, unrivaled by any other character in history. A man who was merely a man and said the sorts of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would either be a lunatic or he would be the devil of hell. Either this man was or is the Son of God, or he's a madman or something even worse. Why? Because belief isn't a choice. I mean, you could take a gun to my head, you could torture my family, and you could say, I want you to believe that gravity doesn't exist. And I could say the words, and I could even live my life like that. I could walk off a building to show that I don't believe in gravity. But deep down in my heart, I know that gravity exists. Therefore, if belief in God is not a choice, why am I doomed to hell for eternity for something that I have no choice in? Warren Buffett right now is the greatest philanthropist in the world. He's given away $46 billion of his hard-earned money towards all kinds of charities, amazing foundations around the world. This man is the pinnacle of what we'd hope that we can achieve together. But on the other hand, we have another man, David Parker Ray. He was called the Toy Box Killer. He's believed to have tortured and killed more than 50 women in a soundproof trailer. The acts that I had to read about this man made the hairs on my arm stand up. I don't even dare repeat them in a public setting like this. This is the bottom of the scale. He was sentenced to over 200 years in prison, and rightfully so for his acts. But after 2.5 years in prison, he found the Bible, became a born-again Christian, and then just months later, died of a heart attack. In John's worldview, if there's a heaven and there's a hell, John believes that this man is deserving of eternal bliss for the life that he led. And this man is deserving of eternal torture for the life that he led. John says it himself. John says, good works do nothing to earn salvation, but there are rewards in eternity for faithfulness, for believing in an idea. How is this fair? Where's the justice here? The topic of today's debate is morality. What is morality? It's the way that we treat each other as human beings. Which of these men treated their fellow human beings better? How is this an understanding of fairness? Let's split the act from the source. I think it's very important that we do this. There are things that I think we can find some common ground on. So if we were to look at things like justice, like peace, love, kindness, I would think those things are good things. Does anybody disagree with me on those? Good. I think, on the other hand, there's things like war, genocide, slavery, rape. Does anybody think that those things are good things? Okay, good. So we're all on the same page. So without knowing where the act is coming from, we have a foundation. That's good. Now we can come up with something maybe that's a little bit more objective. But let's look inside the good book. Malachi says, when he's talking about the prophets, he says, he will turn the hearts of parents to their children and the hearts of children to their parents. That's good. That means bring the family together. I like what he says there. But what does Jesus say? Jesus says, do not suppose that I have come to bring peace on earth. I didn't come to bring peace, but a sword. I've come to turn man against his father, daughter against her mother. A man's enemies will be the members of his own household. He doesn't come to bring peace. He comes to bring war. So who should we believe? Malachi that says bring the family together, or Jesus that says come and rip them apart over beliefs? Another story in the Bible, there was a man who they found gathering sticks on the Sabbath. And the Lord said to Moses, the man must surely be put to death, and all the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. So as the Lord commanded, all the congregation brought him outside to the camp and stoned him with stones, and he died. In Leviticus, regarding slavery, it says, your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them you may buy slaves. They will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property, and you can make them slaves for life. In Exodus, it says, anyone who beats their male or female slaves with a rod must be punished if the slave dies as a direct result. But they are not to be punished if the slave recovers after a day or two, as they are your property. But that was the Old Testament. What about the New Testament, Darren? Didn't things get better? Well, let's have a look. In Colossians, it says, slaves, obey your earthly masters in everything. In Peter, it says, slaves, in reverent fear of God, submit yourselves to your masters, not only those who are good and considerate, but also those who are harsh. Let's talk a little bit about murder. 2 Kings, Elisha was found bumped into some boys, and they said to him, get out of here, Baldy. And for that crime, he called down a curse in the name of the Lord, and 2 bears came and mauled 42 of the boys to pieces. I see the bald guy nodding his head on that one. Judges, Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. He said, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me, I will sacrifice as a burnt offering. And who should come out to meet him but his daughter? And he did to her as he vowed. I will point out that there was no angel of God or God himself that stopped Jephthah from murdering his innocent child. In Numbers, it says, have you allowed all the women to live, Moses asked. Now kill all the boys and kill every woman who has slept with a man, but save for yourselves every girl who has not slept with a man. Save for yourselves the virgins. What do you think they were intending on saving those virgins for? The virgins whose families they just murdered. And in Genesis, God tested Abraham. God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. That's it. God never told Abraham why. Abraham never asked God why. He just obeyed. That's still going on today, by the way. Andrea Yates was fighting a private war between good and evil, and she believed that killing her 5 children would be the final defeating blow to Satan, and she did. She drowned systematically her 5 children in a bathtub. Another Texas woman stoned 2 of her children to death and seriously injured a 3rd. She was driven to kill by a message from God. I felt like I obeyed God, and I believe that there will be good that comes out of this, she says. Here's another example. A woman was ordered to make a human sacrifice and chose to throw her 3 children into the San Francisco Bay because God told her to. Later, she wrote a letter addressed to God from jail. She said, I did what you told me to. Now I'm in lockup. Kiss my boys for me. These are some of the scariest thoughts that we can face as a society. And we have to ask ourselves one key question. How can a person distinguish between God testing us, Satan deceiving us, or mental illness? How do we make that distinction? Because when we look at somebody like Abraham, and Abraham was commanded to kill his innocent child, what was his reasoning that he knew it was God? Because when you ask somebody and you say, well, how do you know? Their answer is, well, all good comes from God. Well, then Abraham's answer should have been, well, intrinsically, when I said we split the act from the source, when we agreed that innocent child murder is wrong, what his answer should have been was, I don't know what devil this is, but my God's a good God and would never command this of me. Therefore, be gone from me, foul spirit. That should have been his answer. Instead, he got up and obeyed it. So, well, then maybe he was a prophet. He recognized the voice of God. Well, do you not think that these women that I just pointed out also heard these voices and developed that relationship over time? Whether you think it was Satan or I personally think it was mental illness, why couldn't that also be the same story with Abraham or any of those other examples that I cited? How did he know that from day one he wasn't being deceived by Satan or mental illness to follow those commands? If God and Satan both have it then within their character to ask for evil commands at face value that intrinsically now just become good, and they both could have the power to deceive us, then did you morally evaluate God to be good? Because when you read the Bible, you had to decide, and you had to say, I think that God is good. You made that moral evaluation. Well, then are men's moral evaluations always correct? And the answer is no. So then, how did you correctly evaluate God to be good and Satan to be the evil one? If there's no way to make that distinction, then how did you judge anything? And why make an excuse then for God's evil commands, but not for Satan's evil commands? Why cherry pick like that? See, because there are people that are blowing themselves up because they hear in their scriptures or in a voice from God telling them to kill innocent people around the world. And the only difference is, what if we were to look at, let's say, Abraham, who hears a voice from God telling him to kill innocent people, and we hear another, this jihadist that hears a command telling him to kill innocent people. The only difference, according to John, is that they have the wrong God. Because if they had the right God, what those jihadists would be doing, according to John, would be now labeled good. So at face value, if we look at these evil commands and we can't decide, again, whether it's God testing us, Satan deceiving us, or mental illness, then how do we know which commands to follow? This goes so far as the Bible. I mean, those people, the men that wrote the Bible, those men had to hear a voice from God. How did they know they weren't being deceived by Satan? How did they know that they didn't have mental illness? All these commands, you have to make a moral evaluation to understand which ones to follow and which ones not. And what would you think of a person who made excuses or stood up for a mass murderer? Now, I don't know if John's going to do this. I'm curious to know what his stance is on this. But if somebody came up and said, I'm going to make an excuse for what Hitler did, or any of those examples that he had cited of those mass murderers, and said, well, there must be some sort of good that could come out of this, how would you feel about that person? So why be good? Because I said so. How deeply unsatisfying is that answer? Because I said so. It might be right. I mean, when a child comes and says, I want to eat candy before dinner. Why can't I have candy? And you say, well, because I said so. It might be right, but we feel something that just digs at us with that answer. We need to understand why. See, this is the key. If we understand why, then we can make moral evaluations correctly. And I know that if I was to take two children out to dinner, and they both misbehaved, and I sat one of them down, and I said, next time you misbehave, I'm going to give you a spanking, but if you behave, I'm going to give you some candy. And I took the other child, and I sat him down, and I explained the consequences of his actions, and told him that how would he feel if he was being disrupted during his meal? And we take them both out to dinner again, and they both behave. Who's acting more morally correct? It's understanding why, and that's the important key, ladies and gentlemen. If you understand why, then we can make better decisions moving forward. So we need to find a foundation. We need some sort of objective standard. I think we can hopefully all agree. The standard is well-being. It's survival and replication and happiness of sentient and social creatures. I mean, this extends to every single one of us. And to look at this, I mean, even in the realm of the supernatural, for those that believe in a heaven or hell, why do we not want to go to hell? I think it's too hot. I mean, if you think about it, it's affecting our well-being, right? Why do we want to go to heaven? Because it's bliss. Again, it affects our well-being in a positive way. But there's a moral landscape. There may not be an objectively peak on what is the best decision to make. There are peaks and there are valleys that we need to understand. So let's imagine that our goal is nutrition. Our goal is health. When we look at nutrition, there's not a best food to eat. There's a plethora of great foods that we can eat that'll constitute health. But I think we can also agree that there are many valleys if our goal is health. We should all agree that drinking battery acid is not going to improve our health, and objectively, that might be a wrong valley to choose. And it's the same thing if our goal is well-being. So, how do I have a working model? As an atheist, an agnostic, how do I have a working model that I can apply every single day to my life to make moral evaluations? It's something called the veil of ignorance. I want you to imagine that before you were born, you didn't know if you're going to be a man or a woman. You don't know if you're going to be of mental capacity. You don't know your sexual orientation. You don't know if you're going to be rich or poor. And you have to draw up a set of rules, a set of guidelines that you can look at objectively to say, I'm going to give myself the best advantage for well-being, survival, replication, and happiness. And I don't know where I'm going to be placed in that society. Because if I do this, and John is now going to start saying to me, well, how, if might makes right, and there's more Germans that say we should, or Nazis, sorry, that should, kill Jews in Nazi Germany. Well, then whose standard do we say that is objectively wrong? What if that's their well-being and that makes them happy? Well, if I was in the veil of ignorance, and what if I pulled the name that put me in that situation where I was now a Jew in that situation? Well, I would say that's affecting my well-being, my survival and replication, and therefore now I have an objective standard to say objectively that is wrong, and I can move about my life with that. Now, as I painted in the very beginning, there are many questions that we don't know the moral answer to. It's hard for us to always get a defined, correct answer. But that's fine, because I would much rather have questions that can't be answered than answers that can't be questioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Darren. Now for the 15-minute rebuttals, John will go first.
Sorry, guys. I was just so riveted to that speech there. Just get set up here. I don't want to do that one again. How's that? I can listen? Okay. All right. Okay, guys. Well, thank you so much for your patience. As predicted, Darren, he did move over into my worldview to get some moral capital. He's talking a lot about equality and love and happiness and all kinds of stuff that has nothing to do with molecules in motion. His whole case against Christian theism was reducible to this: I don't like how God runs the world. Period. There. Thank you. That's not rational. That's arbitrary. It's what I said at the beginning. He claimed that the subject of this debate was, can we be good without God? That is not the subject of this debate. Darren, you and I talked about this. I gave you some promotional material. The debate was framed as an interrogative. Which is ethically superior, Christianity or secularism? And I said very clearly on the promotional material, I would defend the proposition that Christianity is ethically superior to secularism. What is secularism, after all? It's the belief that religion should not play a role in government, education, or other public parts of society. It's the principle of separation of the state from religious institutions. It's a system of social organization that does not allow religion to influence the government, or the belief that religion should not influence the government. The quality of behaving in a way that shows religion does not influence you. Now, in preparation for tonight's debate, I checked 21 standard reference works, and they all agree with this basic definition. Secular ethics, friends, refers to any ethical system that does not draw upon the supernatural. So what does that mean? It means that secularism is practically ethically neutral. There's a whole variety of ethical systems that fall under the broad umbrella of secularism. There's various forms of nihilism, including that of Friedrich Nietzsche. There's eudaimonianism of Plato. There's cultural relativism of Ruth Benedict. There's various forms of egoism, including rational egoism promoted by Ayn Rand. There's the cynicism of Diogenes. There's the categorical imperative system of Immanuel Kant. Various forms of existentialist ethics, including that of Jean-Paul Sartre. There's Epicureanism, Stoicism, skepticism, and various varieties of enlightened self-interest. There's the virtue ethics of Aristotle. There's the ethical subjectivism of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Various kinds of utilitarianism. We heard a variety of that here tonight, including that of Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill. And there's the ethics of care of Nell Noddings. Now, even if you could distill these down into some categories, which I don't think you can, but even if you could, you'd still have nihilism, utilitarianism, deontology, virtue ethics, and existentialist ethics. Friends, this is what you got here on secularism. It's a bunch of arrows pointing in all different directions, and arrows pointing in different directions have no practical value. The practical equivalent here is that there's no arrows at all. And just like I predicted, Darren was not defending the proposition that secularism was ethically superior to Christianity. He just chose his own ethical system. He gave us some thought experiments, and he says, there, that's it. Arbitrary, right to the last word. Christianity, on the other hand, is intrinsically ethical. It's centered around a personal God, the author and designer of the universe. He's a personal agent, morally perfect, and his laws reflect his good and just character. Why did Darren bother to give us all those Old Testament references? Commands from the Mosaic Law. I predicted he would do that, even though we've talked about this prior to our debate. What frightens me the most about Darren is that he's a Darwinist. And Darwinism, as I say, has an abysmal history. Societally, it promotes the idea that we have an animal ancestry. It denies the soul of a man and a woman. It teaches biological inequality and the struggle for existence, with death providing progress. And it shakes out at the end to be morally relative. Bertrand Russell, the great atheist philosopher, said man is just the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms. That's all you are. So another secularist, David Brower, he says, while the death of young men in war is unfortunate, it's no more serious than the touching of mountains and wilderness areas by mankind. What are you going to say to someone like that, Darren? You going to wave your finger in his face and say, no, you must think the way I do? That's arbitrary. The tension is horizontal. Didn't Richard Dawkins say it's up to individuals and societies to decide? Darren says survival and reproduction are the chief goals, the pinnacle things, just like Michael Roos and Richard Dawkins. Who here has seen that movie, Equilibrium? You ever see that movie? Seriously underrated. Come on, guys, this is a great movie. You got to see that. Okay, some sci-fi. Okay, it's a bleak picture of the future, where everyone is required by the government to take a drug twice a day, and it kills emotions, no love, and it's a culture supersaturated with lies and propaganda, deception. But guess what? Everybody's functioning just fine when it comes to survival and reproduction. Darren, is this what you're saying? Are you telling us that a world without love, as long as we're surviving and reproducing like a bunch of hive bees, that's fine? I mean, I can't believe it. On the utilitarian view, Darren sounds like a utilitarian to me. At least he's a consequentialist. We can say that at least. But here, just to do a thought experiment, here we have a guy, he rescues an unconscious lady from a burning car. Darren says survival and reproduction. That's the pinnacle thing here. So on the one hand, you have a guy who really loves this lady, and he really cares for her, and he puts his life on the line to get her out of that car. And on the other hand, you have another guy who pulls an unconscious lady out of a car, and he cares nothing for that woman at all. He's only doing it so he will get a medal, and everyone will think well of him. On Darren's view, both of these are equal. Both shake out to survival and reproduction. Here's another one. How about if the guy who took the unconscious woman out of the car raped her? And when she woke up, she had no idea what happened. And no other human being on the earth but that man knows what happened. Would that be okay? No societal bonds have been disrupted. I think it's not okay. There's a God in heaven who says that's not okay. But you see, unbridled self-indulgence on the part of one generation without regard to the future ones is the modus operandi of biological evolution and may be regarded as rational behavior. This is W.H. Murdy from Science magazine. He says there's just no room for good sportsmanship. Too many organisms are born, so quite simply a lot of them are going to have to die. This is exactly what Charles Darwin was teaching. The origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored races. Charles Darwin said in the future, the civilized races would exterminate and replace the savage races. The atheist Stephen Jay Gould, the biologist, he said biological arguments for racism may have been common before 1850, but they increased by orders of magnitude following acceptance of the evolution theory. Why? Because on Darren's view, we really aren't equal. And so why bother treating each other as equals? Darren just says, well, you should do that. I agree, Darren. I'll tell you why. Because God said so. And that I said so reflects his good and just and perfect character. And we don't play with that. Richard Weikart, PhD in modern European history, now professor of history at California State University, he said the notions of evolutionary progress coming through the death of multitudes is not a misapplication of Darwin. That's exactly what he was teaching. And I can give you quotes from SS propaganda pamphlets. These things were approved by Hitler and Himmler. And so the New Scientist magazine tells us that there's a direct line that runs from Darwin to the extermination camps of Nazi Europe. Hitler was not a theist. Hitler was steadfastly anti-Christian. Of course he was. Of course he was anti-Christian. That's very funny, I know. I regard Christianity, he says, as the most fatal, seductive lie that ever existed, and I have biographies of Hitler's life, if you'd like to read them. Hitler may have been religiously pagan, but he was ethically Darwinian. He was utilitarian, and so was Joseph Stalin. You read the authorized biographies of these guys. Stalin was not a certifiable psychotic. His regime was characterized by systematic oppression. He was asked, how long are you going to keep shooting people and sending them to Siberia? He said, as long as it's in the interest of the state. The end justifies the means, and motive doesn't matter. And that's a nightmare ethic. And that is secularism. Those were secularist regimes. The testimony of secularism is horrible. The devaluing of human life, the racism, the oppression, the mass murder, the moral relativism, and it's been a real hindrance to modern scientific research. It's all built now around the evolution story, which is absolutely useless. The director of research at the National Center for Scientific Research in France said that evolution is a fairy tale for grown-ups. The theory has helped nothing in the progress of science. It's useless. W.R. Thompson, the director of the Commonwealth Institute of Biological Control in Ottawa, he said the success of Darwinism was accomplished by the decline in scientific integrity. I say so. What a horrible track record. Whether it's falsifying data to promote this ridiculous idea of evolution, or whether it's deliberately ignoring the brilliant research of men like Mendel for over 35 years because people were enamored of Darwin, or whether it's not bothering to look at important morphological and physiological functions of anatomical structures yet to be understood, evolution has become a real hindrance to scientific research. You know, a lot of atheists say to me, all scientists are atheists. Oh, really? Well, first of all, I doubt it, but second of all, if atheists dominate the scientific world, maybe that's why we have such a problem now with scientists faking their data. 34% admitted to questionable research practices. This is an epidemic going on here. This Mail Online article from 2012 says scientists falsify data to get research published, and whistleblowers are bullied into keeping quiet. More than 1 in 10 scientists and doctors claim to have witnessed colleagues deliberately fabricating data. 13% of doctors and scientists know colleagues who have falsified data to get research published. How different from the biblical ethic? Don't lie to each other. God is watching. And all liars will have their part in the lake of fire. You know? The testimony of history is so much better. As I say, we're the ones who created hospitals and the first great charity organizations. Henry Dunant, who founded the Red Cross, said he was an instrument of God's will. It was a sacred duty for him to do this. The Yale historian, Dr. Kenneth Scott Laureate, he said the use of money for the general welfare, Christianity brought significant innovations. Dr. Martineau exhaustively researched through historical documents and concluded that antiquity has left no trace of any organized charitable effort. The Oxford scholar Robert Lane Fox, he writes, whereas the corn doles of the pagan cities had been confined to its citizens, usually to those who were quite well off, the Christians' charity were for those who were in most need. Even Eileen Pagels, not a Christian, she says what distinguished Christians from everyone else, according to both pagan and Christian contemporaries, was the moral rigor which impressed even the pagans hostile to the movement. The great historian Will Durant says the same thing. The morals of the early Christians were a reproving example to the pagan world. And Joseph Rather says it was the Latin church which succeeded little by little in restraining violence and restoring order, justice, and decency. The agnostic scholar Gunter Louis says an ethic of moral autonomy and individual rights, so important to secular liberals, is incapable of sustaining and nourishing values such as altruism and self-sacrifice. I just want to quickly move ahead here, if I can, to science and technology, because we often hear that science is a friend of the atheist, the materialist, the Darwinist, and that science is against the Bible. Nothing could be further from the truth. All the major founders of the major branches of science today were Christians. Francis Bacon or Isaac Newton, Galileo, Copernicus, Kepler, Cuvier, Faraday, Pascal, they were all creationists. And Lorne Isley, another atheist himself, says it is the Christian world which finally gave birth in clear articulated fashion to the experimental method of science itself. He says it's surely one of the curious paradoxes of history that science, which professionally has little to do with faith, owes its origins to an act of faith that the universe can be rationally interpreted, and that science today is sustained by that assumption. You want to account for the success-generating quality of science? Only the Christian can do that. Darren and I had long discussions on this. We've had 3 rounds now on the problem of induction, and he's no closer to giving me an account for why inductive reasoning is valid. He was talking about slavery. Let's just quickly look at some issue, the issue of slavery. His complaint is totally irrational as an atheist. It's okay to own animals, isn't it? Aren't we just animals? Why is it not okay to own a human? But the Bible makes a real distinction between us and the animals. It was the Christians that brought about the modern abolitionist movement. Every history book in the world, I think, unless it has a real axe to grind, will tell you that public pressure, first from the Quakers, got the genuine abolitionist movement off the ground. It originated in the Great Quaker Revival. These are Christians. And it became quickly the testimony of serious religion if you stood against slavery. He's talking about people receiving visions from God. How about Harriet Tubman? This CBC News article says that Harriet Tubman worked so hard to get the slaves to freedom, she said she was hearing from God, from the Christian God, and she was getting people to freedom. Today we have a modern abolitionist movement. I hope you'll get on board, the Joy Smith Foundation. And don't follow our liberal youth who are trying to reverse some of these laws, to decriminalize some of this. Joy Smith is working hard to end human trafficking in Canada, and she made Canadian history by amending the criminal code twice to put an end to human trafficking. Now that is a modern abolitionist movement, and if you talk to her, she will tell you what she's doing directly flows from her Christian convictions. I've been downtown many, many times over the last 20 years, ministering to people. Not once has anyone ever come to me and said, "Hey, what secularist group are you from? Which mosque do you represent?" No. I've heard many, many times someone will come to me and ask me, "What church are you guys with?" I have a question for Darren before I run out of time, and a question for all of you. If you were downtown at 2 in the morning, downtown Winnipeg, let's say you're on Spence or Home Street or someplace, and your car broke down, middle of the night, and you saw 5 youths with leather jackets and ripped jeans heading your way, would you or would you not feel better knowing they just came from a Bible study? Now, you can snicker and laugh, but deep down in your hearts, you know exactly what I'm talking about. All right. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thank you, John.
We good? Yep.
the food preferences of my capuchin monkeys correspond exactly with the prices in the supermarket. And so if you give them grapes, that's a far better food, then you create inequity between them. So that's the experiment we did. Recently, we videotaped it with new monkeys who had never done the task, thinking that maybe they would have a stronger reaction, and that turned out to be right. The one on the left is the monkey who gets cucumber. The one on the right is the one who gets grapes. The one who gets cucumber, note that the first piece of cucumber is perfectly fine. The first piece she eats. Then she sees the other one getting grape, and you will see what happens. So she gives a rock to us, that's the task. And we give her a piece of cucumber, and she eats it. The other one needs to give a rock to us. And that's what she does. And she gets a grape. And she eats it. The other one sees that. She gives a rock to us now, gets again cucumber. She tests the rock now against the wall. She needs to give it to us. And she gets cucumber again. So this is basically the Wall Street protest that you see here.
So when we look at animals, we can see that they don't have a Bible, they don't have commandments, they don't have Jesus, but they understand equality and they understand fairness without having these constructs. So that begs the question, what's the difference between, let's say, a lion that eats a gazelle? I know John mentioned that earlier. What about a toddler that rips apart your favorite book? What about somebody that has mental illness and you find that he does something deplorable? And a normal functioning adult. What is the difference between these four categories? Well, the first three don't understand why. They don't understand the cognitive functioning as much as a normal functioning adult. And that's why we don't hold them as accountable for their actions, because they can't come to that comprehension. So as sane and functioning humans, we have to understand that there are generally things that are preferable to others. So life is generally preferable to death, health is generally preferable to sickness, and pleasure is generally preferable to pain. Why is that? Well, I mean, let's take it, for example, life is generally preferable to death. Well, the people that think it's the other way around aren't generally here for us to ask them why they think it's the other way around. So if we can understand that there are things like this, then how do we now define good? How do we define that? Well, if we imagined a universe where there was the worst possible suffering for everyone for as long as possible without any type of silver lining, we, as sane functioning adults, can objectively say that that is bad. Would you guys agree? Raise your hands if you don't agree, okay? And so because of that, what we can say now is that any degree of movement away from that universe is now what we can label as good. That degree of movement is how we define the word good now. All right, John's favorite topic, let's get there. Hitler and the Nazis. All right, perfect. So first off, Hitler was an announced Christian. They marched with the belt buckles, God is with us. He met with the Pope several times. And he said in the Mein Kampf, he said, hence today I believe that I'm acting in accordance with the will of the Almighty Creator. By defending myself against the Jew, I am fighting for the work of the Lord. Later on in a speech, he said, my feeling as a Christian points me to my Lord and Savior as a fighter. This is God's truth. I had many opportunities of quotes from him and some of the other men that he had pointed out that were doing these atrocious things. But I don't point this out to say that the war or these atrocities were caused because of Hitler and the Nazis being Christians. I'm not necessarily saying that. There might be aspects of that, but the point that I'm trying to make by illustrating this is that why do men go to war? Well, men go to war for power, for money, for land. But they don't go to war for atheism. But I will say that they do go to war for religion. So why add one more thing to the docket? So John and I have discussed this in the past, and he says, well, everybody knows that God exists. Darren, you're just suppressing that. And he's written his moral code on your heart, and you're just suppressing it. You know that God exists deep down, Darren. Stop suppressing it. So I say to him, well, here's one of his heroes, William Lane Craig, in an interview. The interviewer said, so we're back to everybody believes in God, and I'm just going to somehow beat it out of you. And Dr. Craig says, well, you just declare this as truth. That's fine for preaching, but that's not apologetics. The minute you construe this as some sort of argument, then you're arguing in a circle. You're begging the question. You're just saying God exists, therefore God exists. And that's not glorifying to God. That's just bad reasoning. A scientific journal recently published an article that also said when a committed Christian says he believes in the second coming of Christ, he believes it like he believes Michael Jordan was a basketball player, and I'm fine with that. But when an avowed atheist says there is no such thing as God, she knows it in the way that she knows that Elvis was a rock star. So when I say I don't believe in God, I'm actually saying that. I'm not suppressing some sort of truth or moral code that's written on my heart. So in terms of free will, which didn't get brought up with John today, but he may address this later on in the closer cross-examination, but I often hear this, so I figured I'd bring this up. Well, the reason that there is pain and suffering in the world, Darren, is because we have free will, right? If we didn't have the ability to do evil, then we'd be automatons having to just be good, right? So let's just quickly address that. Is there evil in heaven? Well, no, there wouldn't be evil in heaven. So then the final question is, would we then have free will in heaven? Because you would say, yes, we can have free will in heaven and there's no evil in heaven. So great, we have a situation now whereby we can have no evil and also still have free will. So why can't we have that on earth? So let's look at the scale of good and evil, right? We've got things that are good, like helping others, and there's God commands these things, right? But there's also things that are heinous, the worst things that we could possibly think of that, in my opinion, shouldn't even be on this scale. It should be far beyond it, like murdering an innocent child, where God either commands or allows it or does it himself. Okay, well, the answer to that is, well, his ways are higher than our ways, Darren. So these acts are still good. They're good, but we just can't see why they're good yet because his ways are higher. Fine, you can use that excuse, but then if we just switch around one of the words from God commands or allows to Satan commands or allows, why can't we use the exact same rebuttal? His ways are higher than our ways, so yeah, if he did something like that, that might be deplorable, and again, I don't believe in Satan, by the way, so I'm not standing up for him in this case, but I'm saying, like, he also does things that are less than that, like lying or deceiving. So if we can make excuses for God killing innocent children, why can't we use the same excuse for somebody like Satan, for example, saying, well, he lied to deceive, but his ways might be higher than our ways, we just don't know. So it's important we understand that there is a shift happening. And I would hope that we all agree on this. So the question is, did we see this shift happening before and after Moses' law and the Ten Commandments? Well, yeah, we saw that shift happen, and hopefully we agree that it's good. What about then before and after the New Testament with Jesus' new law? Well, yeah, we saw that shift happen, and I guess we agree that it's good. But then what about before and after 1834 regarding slavery? Well, yeah, we saw that shift happen, and we agree that it's good. So then what about before 1916 regarding the women's right for equal vote? Well, yeah, we saw that shift happen, and we agree that it's good. So before and after 1965 with the African American right to vote, yeah, we saw that shift happen, and we agree that it's good. Before and after 1967 regarding interracial marriage, well, yeah, we saw the shift happen, and we agree it's good. And so that leads us up to the questions around us today, like before and after 2005 regarding gay marriage. Well, hopefully we start seeing that shift happen, and hopefully we start agreeing that it's good. Because what is the common denominator here, guys? The common denominator is that we're getting closer to fair and equal rights for everyone. So what are we to make of a book that doesn't shift and update, that stays the same, while our secular and moral society is shifting, and we agree that it's good? If there's no way to update this book, then how are we to update our morality as we see these things happen? Is it always wrong, then, for homosexuality? In Leviticus, it says they're to be put to death for these things. We don't do that anymore today. Why? What about abortion? John's a big advocate for this. And he's, in the Bible it says things, not for it. He says, in the Bible it says, before I was born, the Lord called to me from my mother's womb and spoke my name. So God's essentially saying, well, you were a person in the womb. But what about if that mother has, a very small chance of living if she takes it to term? And what if the fetus isn't possibly going to be even a stillbirth? I mean, is there ever a situation where this could be allowed? What about in terms of divorce? In the Bible it says a woman is bound to her husband as long as he lives. Well, what if that husband is beating her and might murder her one day? Does she ever have the right to step away from that marriage and move on with her life? What about murder? I mean, if you had the chance to stop somebody like Hitler, for example, would that always be wrong? And what about theft? If you're in the eye of Katrina and all the shop owners have left and you don't have any money and the only thing that you can do is to steal a loaf of bread to feed your starving family, is it always wrong to steal? Because if we don't have a standard then we have no way to judge it. Richard Dawkins says the Bible's a terrible moral compass. If you think about it, of course you can cherry pick the verses you like, which means the verses that happen to coincide with our modern secular consensus. But then you have to have the rationale for leaving out the ones that say stone people to death if they break the Sabbath or commit adultery. It's an appalling moral compass. We have to understand, guys, that the goal is getting better at getting better. Thank you.
All right, we're now going to have the cross-examination at 5 minutes apiece. The one under examination will try to refrain from answering with questions for their examiner. Sorry if I got that wrong. But John will start the cross-examination with Darren.
I don't know if they will get us, but oh man, I'm going to get. How about that? Is that in my face still? My head is tall. Okay. Who goes first?
I've got you cross-examining Darren.
Okay, so 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, Darren, thanks for putting in the effort to come here, round 3 for us.
Yep.
I have some questions. Are you a materialist?
Getting some feedback? Is that me?
Do we need to move, Darren? How's that? Will that work?
Better.
Okay. Okay, so maybe we set that.
Yeah, I wasn't counting that.
Okay. Darren, are you a materialist? Do you believe that all of reality is reducible to space, time, matter, and energy?
Yes.
That's where you're at. Okay. Are you Darwinian?
Yes.
Okay. So you don't see any intentionality to the created order? Or it's not even a created order. It's just a cosmos,
Well,
I guess.
I mean, if you're talking about purpose, we imbue purpose on our lives. So we can set in motion whatever purpose that we want, and we can change it at any time.
Right,
as well.
yeah. But the universe is not here for a reason.
No.
Okay. And therefore, we're not here for any reason.
But we can change that reason. So we can imbue, like I just said, we can imbue our own reasoning
Okay.
on our purpose.
The standard definition for human rights are that they are principles of freedom or entitlement. They are rules prescribing what are allowed of people or owed to people. On your account of the universe reducible to space, time, matter, and energy, how would you account for something like human rights? Where do they come from? What's the foundation for human rights?
The foundation is we just ask people how they feel. And we say, look, if people want happiness, survival, replication, and well-being for sentient and social creatures, then we now have an understanding of what we view as good. And also, because I know where your line of questioning is going to lead to, so I may as well answer it, is that if we have a universe, like I mentioned just now, with the worst possible suffering for everybody for as long as humanly possible without a silver lining, any degree of movement away from that is what we can now label as good.
Do human beings discover rights, or are we creating them?
Well, we're creating them as we
We're
go, and
creating
we're
human
changing
rights.
them too.
Okay, so human rights they don't actually exist.
We're coming to
They're just mental abstractions.
We're
right?
coming to an understanding of fairness for everybody, and that's where we see this secular movement happen.
Where are you getting fairness? As a Darwinian, in what sense are we equal? If we're just physical objects, and every measurable characteristic about us is unequal with our neighbor, in what sense are we then equal?
Okay, so in terms of fairness and equality, like I said, the way that I understand this is that if I was to pull myself out of the equation and I was to say, look, I don't know if I'm going to be a man or a woman, rich or poor, mental capacities or social or sexual orientations, I now can say this is the rules that I would want for fairness and equality in an objective standard that I can now treat and develop with my fellow human
How is that an
beings.
objective standard? If objective
Because I'm
means
pulling myself out, and I don't know where I could be.
how
be
could you
anybody.
possibly do that? How are you ever going to pull yourself out of the equation?
Because
you're the guy who's doing this mental exercise, right? How are you going to get an objective? See, this is a big problem in philosophy, isn't it? Objectivity seems to be beyond our grasp, but not on the Christian worldview. So again, I'm going to ask you, how is this objective?
So if I take myself out of the equation and I could be anybody, that is now more towards an objective standard. But there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer. When we talk about peaks and valleys on the moral landscape, we know that there are things that are objectively better and objectively worse. And hopefully we can agree that maybe there isn't the best way to answer something.
So on the moral landscape, the peaks are people enjoying well-being, and the valleys are those who are suffering misery, we'll say, right? That's my correct. Okay.
Yeah.
So we can imagine a state of affairs in which all the peaks are occupied by maniacs like Manson and Dahmer and all the rest of them. Would that be a moral world?
No, of course not.
Why not?
Because they aren't sane, functioning human beings.
Who decides?
Do you think they are?
No, you're not asking me questions. I'm asking you questions. Who decides what is this?
Okay, I will answer. I think that they're not sane, functioning adults.
Okay, according to what standard?
According to our standards of mental illness.
And who is establishing those standards?
The doctors that spend their lives studying
Okay,
this.
so human beings who are nothing more than piles of chemicals, bags of biological stuff being pushed around by physics and chemistry, they're the ones who decide which chemical reactions are right functioning.
The thing is that you and I agree on this, John. You agree that there are people...
No, I'm asking you a question.
No,
I just asked you a question.
I'm answering it.
Yeah.
Because if you agree with me on the same point, then you would agree that there are people that aren't sane, functioning adults, and their voice should not be heard. If somebody says to you, I don't choose to understand the chemical compounds of water makeup, I don't want to believe that H2O is water, we don't put them into the realm of science for that. So somebody is saying, well, I don't want to be in the same realm as sane functioning adults. If you and I agree that there are people like that out there, we can discard their opinions if they think that well-being...
I just don't know where you're getting the standard. I don't know where the standard's coming from. I gave you a whole smattering of other secular ethical systems. You've chosen one of your own making, and you're saying, this is the one, guys, we're under moral obligation, everybody, to follow this. I'd like to know how you justify that.
Again, there's not an objective answer. I'm saying that. I'm saying that we have things that are towards more of an objective truth, but what we need to do is we need to understand there are peaks and valleys. So I can't really ask you the question, but I would say, do you think well-being is the foundation? Because if you and I and everybody here agrees that well-being of sentient and social creatures with happiness, fairness, replication, survival is the goal. If we can all agree to that, then we have an objective standard. And the only person that you're going to throw in there is somebody that has mental illness, which we agree there are people like that.
Which you can't even account for on your worldview. Something like mental illness.
Okay, so that's what will be allowed. A few seconds over if there's a final question near the end.
Okay.
John, did you morally evaluate God to be all good?
No, God speaks and I listen to him. I believe. I do not put God on the witness stand and cross-examine him. He speaks on his own
So
authority.
you didn't make that moral
No, how could I?
evaluation?
I'm a creature. He's my creator. Why would I assess him for
Did you-
reliability
did
or
you
moral
morally
trustworthiness?
evaluate Satan to be evil?
According to God's standards, yes, I have.
Okay.
God said that guy's evil, and I say, yes, Lord, I believe you.
Okay, so moral evaluations are incorrect sometimes, correct? By,
Oh,
by men's standards.
Sure,
Okay.
sure.
So
yeah.
then, how do we have an objective way to know that God is the good one and Satan's the evil one?
If you want some evidence of that, there's an empty tomb and an empty cross, and there's the promise of
So
eternal
magic
life.
tricks.
If you will take him up on it, if you'll surrender your life to Jesus, he'll take you to heaven.
So,
But I mean, Jesus died a horrible death to pay your sin debt and mine, and he did that because he loves you, and the Bible says he loved you first.
First off, that's an assertion, and I'm not going to take magic tricks as a moral foundation.
Right, but you are asking me, and I have to answer according to my worldview. I'm not going to pretend to be neutral here. I'm a Christian, and I have to answer as a Christian. So don't get offended.
So, okay, so one more time. So the way
Yeah.
that you know that God is the good one and Satan is the evil one, the way that you've made that moral evaluation is how?
I did not morally evaluate God. God speaks.
How did you make
and
that decision?
He talked to me.
He talked to you.
In
Was
his
it
word-
an audible voice?
No, he speaks in his word. His word is self-authenticating.
How do you know that
his
that
word,
wasn't mental illness?
because if God does not exist, I have no way to assess what is mental illness. Remember, we're all just chemicals, walking bags of biological stuff,
Do you
being
think-
pushed around by
do you
physics
think
and
that-
chemistry.
do
How
you-
can you assess anybody for mental illness?
Do you
It
think
makes no
that
sense.
some people hear the voice of God and are mentally not hearing the voice of God? They have mental illness.
I think what you mean to ask is, are there people who claim to hear God's voice and they're not really hearing it?
That's right.
Sure.
So
Sure.
how did you make the distinction that you're not one of them?
Well, because I'm reading his Bible.
So are they.
Well, they're doing things that are not in accordance with the Bible, though.
Like
God never
innocent-
told anybody to drown kids in a bathtub.
Oh, well, according to the Bible, he's commanded the killing of innocent children. So
Well,
what's the difference?
When did this happen? Are you talking about the Old Testament?
Uh,
You're
so,
talking
okay.
about the Mosaic Law
Let's
again.
move into
again.
that then. Let's move
yeah,
into that. Can
sure.
morality change over time?
No, love is the greatest of ethics.
So morality did not change.
No, there are certain prescriptions for a certain people group at a certain time in a certain geographical location. Darren, you already know this because we talked about this.
Yeah,
I'm
no, I know,
dispensational.
but I want them
well,
to.
I'm dispensational in my theology, and I
Okay,
can defend that.
Let's, because some people may not understand what that means, so let's break it down for them. So,
Sure.
if we were to say, look, something abstract like picking up sticks on the Sabbath, okay, I would think that's an amoral command. There's no good or bad to this command. But before Mosaic Law, this was good. It was allowed. You could pick up sticks. After Mosaic Law, or during Mosaic Law, you couldn't. And now we can again. So we've got it's good, then it's morally bad, then it's good. So the shift should be eventually that it could become morally bad.
Yeah, are you
again.
asking a question, Darren?
Yeah,
or
I'm
what's
moving
happening
there.
here?
So
Okay.
did you see this shift happen with that command? Did this change from good to bad to good?
Yeah, God had a specific people group, national ethnic Israel. He said, for you guys, here's a special law for you at this time, at this place, and you need to follow these rules.
Okay.
Right?
So,
That's how that went.
okay.
The,
so
the pagans who lived at that
so
time
the
and
moral
place were not under
commands-
moral
the moral
obligation.
commands can change over time, correct?
Sure.
Okay, so can they change tomorrow?
What are you getting at? I don't understand what you...
If God commanded tomorrow that we have to stone people for picking
Right,
up
and,
sticks
that,
on the
and you
Sabbath,
asked
can
me...
that happen?
That is a nonsense question.
Why not?
Because we're living in the dispensation
You
of
would have.
gra- we are living today...
You would have said that one day before Mosaic law came into place, and then the next day Mosaic law came
Oh,
into
no,
place.
you're
and-
wrong about that, because the prophets of the Old Testament were looking ahead to the New Covenant. They were looking ahead. No one thought that no one who was thinking back then really believed that the Mosaic Covenant was the end-all, be-all. They were looking ahead to the New
Can
Covenant.
the dispensations change in the future?
No, because God has spelled out earth history. Science,
now
history, and
that's it.
prophecy are all spelled out for us.
So morality.
But you should know that, Darren, because you read the Bible, remember?
I have read the Bible,
Yeah.
of course.
You should know those
have to.
things.
It's good to read fiction once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to ask you: is it? Would you, if you were in the right dispensation, then, would you kill a child if God asked you to?
Well, I'm in this dispensation, and this dispensation will end with the return of Jesus. So he's never going to ask me to do something
but
like that.
if you were in that dispensation.
If I were in that dispensation, this is really...
Just really quickly, guys, dispensation is just he's dispensing the knowledge over time. But
And the way he interacts with people and his commands to them, and things change. The way you approach God... and
can you
in each
answer the question, though? Would you, if you were in that dispensation and you were commanded to
Well,
stone
I'm
a man
not.
to
Okay, let's
if
just be
you
clear
were-
about this, friends. We're not. We never will be. But you asked the question,
Yes.
if I was living in that dispensation, I would say, God, please help me to do this horrible thing that I have to do right now.
And you would do
to
it.
satisfy you. Well, I would certainly do my best to do what God told me to do.
I think I rest my case.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
know what case that is, but okay.
Here we go. All right, and now we are going to go with the closing statements with John, followed by Darren.
Okay. I need my,
And I'm not sure how long we have set for this.
I think
5 minutes, okay.
Oh my goodness. Sorry, guys. Okay. All right. Well, friends, thank you so much. Everyone's still awake, and we didn't lose anybody, I don't think, so that's good. I wanted to argue tonight. I tried my best to argue for two contentions. First, that God is the necessary foundation for objective moral values and duties. I think that contention has gone pretty unchallenged. I heard a lot of opinion from Darren, but I didn't get anything objective. Number two, Christianity is intrinsically ethical, centered around a personal God, while secularism is ethically neutral. There was all kinds of competing ethical systems. Remember, on the Christian worldview, there is a right way to connect experiences and to interpret them. We say God provides the needed objective rational standards and moral obligations to do this. Now, Darren wants to talk as though there is a right way to do all these things, but he can't account for this. All he has is human opinion, conflicting human opinion. And he wants to say some opinions are better than others, and in the final analysis, it's because that's the opinion he likes. And that's not rational. The Bible says that love is the greatest of ethics. On Christianity, love is the foundation and the objectively prescribed goal. Love is a priceless spiritual reality that reflects the character of God. I don't think I heard the word love once come out of his mouth. On the secularist view, survival and reproduction are the arbitrary goals. And love is just an electrical chemical reaction in a physical brain. Remember W.H. Murdy's quote, "Unbridled self-indulgence is the modus operandi of biological evolution and may be regarded as rational behavior." Remember this fella, the Milwaukee cannibal, Jeff Dahmer? It's okay, friends, to eat broccoli for fun, right? Broccoli is just a piece of nature. Eat it for fun. Is it okay to eat your neighbor for fun? Absolutely not. Why not? Because we're image bearers of God, and we know that we have some objective value. But Dahmer himself was quoted on NBC Dateline. He said, if a person doesn't think there's a God to be accountable to, then what's the point of trying to modify your behavior to keep it within acceptable ranges? That's how I thought anyway. I always believed the theory of evolution as truth, that we all just came from the slime. How different from the biblical description of man. God created man in his own image and likeness. And God is made of one blood, all the nations of people to fill the earth. And you know, that was given political application, and that's why women have the vote, and that's why there's no slavery in the Western world. Okay? That's why you have charitable organizations and hospitals and all such things. This is from the Times Online, Matthew Paris. He writes, as an atheist, I truly believe Africa needs God. In Africa, Christianity changes people's hearts. It brings a spiritual transformation. The rebirth is real and the change is good. This is John Steinrucken, another atheist. He says Western civilization's survival, including the survival of open secular thought, depends on the continuance within our society of the Judeo-Christian tradition. Jürgen Habermas, another philosopher, he says universal egalitarianism, from which sprang the ideals of freedom and a collective life and solidarity, the autonomous conduct of life and emancipation, the individual morality of conscience, human rights, and democracy. This is the direct legacy of the Judeo ethic of justice and the Christian ethic of love. I have a number of quotes from these men. These men, they are atheists. They are Darren's guys. And it's the most capable thinkers among them. And they're saying, we've had it if we jettison Christianity. Marcelo Pera says, and again another atheist, the intellectual and political battle of liberalism against the old social hierarchies and despotisms, including the alliance of throne and altar, was fought and won by adopting a Christian political theology because this political theology explicitly or implicitly offers the best tools to justify the dignity of man, and as a consequence, the concept of human rights. And now he gets negative. Listen to this, please. With its words, liberal secularism preaches freedom, tolerance, and democracy, but with its deeds, it attacks precisely that Christian religion which prevents freedom from deteriorating into license, and tolerance into indifference, and democracy into anarchy. Friends, I think it's been made very clear here tonight that Christianity is clearly ethically superior to secularism and all its horrors, and I hope one day we'll say goodbye to it sooner rather than later. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Thanks, John. Yesterday was 420. Some of you guys might know what that means. It's a day of marijuana. Weed has certain effects like short-term memory loss, and also has effects like short-term memory loss. And we need to keep that in mind, because yesterday was an atrocious day in history. It's the anniversary of the Columbine shooting, where people that weren't necessarily the same sane mindset as us gunned down and killed innocent children. It was also the anniversary of Hitler's birthday, and the death toll climbed to 1,000 deaths between the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland. Today, that war has now claimed over 3,000 lives. It's an atrocious day in history. Maybe the effects of that weed could be used to forget. But today is April 21st. And today in history, there was over 100,000 peaceful student demonstrators in 1989 that marched in China to Tiananmen Square. They wanted democracy. They wanted a fair and equal right for voice. And they were standing up against a communist government who sent in the military against these peaceful protesters, telling them what was right. They said, "You listen to us. We're going to tell you what's good and what's bad." And they stood up in opposition and gathered over 1 million people to demonstrate, to say that there aren't things that you're just going to tell us that is intrinsically right. We're going to stand up for what we believe in human rights. And that leads us to tomorrow, April 22nd, Earth Day. That's the one day that we come together as a social world to say we can do better, we can unite. 190 nations signed the Paris Treaty Accord to bring down global emissions and to unite our planet for a common goal for the first time. And when we look at the way that this shift has happened from yesterday and the atrocities that we saw in our past and all of the human rights that were violated, today maybe what we need to do is stand up against that authoritative voice telling us intrinsically what is just going to be good, and standing up for us as a planet together, so that way tomorrow we can unite together and come to discuss reality. Thank you.
Okay, now we're going to have a quick 5-minute recess to set up the Q&A session. Questions can be prepared during this time. Get in a quick refreshment or restroom break. Before we break, though, just a few quick rules just to ensure a smooth Q&A. We'll ask that these be in question form only, no essays, so basically brief and to the point, please. up to a minute per question, I guess. And then 2, just try to refrain from following up the answers with extra questions. Other than that, thank you all very much for sharing this evening, and God bless. Yeah. All right, everybody. I assume that everybody's had the chance to get some questions figured out here. So the way it's going to work is, to my understanding, we're going to line up in two lines, one with questions for John and one for questions with Darren. And unfortunately, we've only got the one mic right now, so you'll just have to just pick up the mic, and or I can hand it to you. And I'm just going to get my stopwatch here because we do have a anticipated time limit. So yeah, if anyone can just come down and form the lines, and we'll get this thing underway. Yeah, we'll say that side there for John and this side for Darren here. Yes. So I guess. Yep. Okay. Is this thing on?
Yep, sounds like.
It's hard to tell with the
Oh, there we go.
another mic.
Okay.
This is a question for John. John, if you were Abraham, would you have responded physically to God's command in killing your son?
If I was Abraham?
If you were Abraham and God commanded you to kill your son,
these
would
are
you
hard
have
questions.
responded physically?
Well, if I was actually him, that I would actually do all the things that he did, and I guess I would take him to the top of Mount Moriah. Let's remember that God did not allow him to do it, though. God stepped in and actually provided a substitution. God provided a ram in Isaac's place, right?
But
So-
you would proceed physically up to some
Well, it's a
point.
hard question. I mean, this is over and done with. God's never going to ask that of anybody ever again. You ask the question, if I were him, then my answer is, if I were actually him, I would do all the things that he did, right? And I don't know what's the point. Can I ask you what's the point of that question? What are you trying to get at?
I'm just trying to get at how you responded to whether you would have acted like Abraham or not.
And
Would you
what's the
follow
significance,
God's
though?
command if he asked you to do a heinous act?
Yeah, what's the significance, though? Why are you asking that question? I don't
It's a
understand.
moral question.
Yeah, well, it doesn't have any significance. I can't see the significance of
It's
it.
in
I
the
would try to,
Bible.
I'll just get, well, I don't know what standard you're using
No,
to judge
just
the
wait
Bible.
your turn there.
I'll just say this, and we'll leave it there. I will always try to do my very best to do everything that God commands me to do. I fall short every single day, but I really do my best to do what He's commanded me to do. That's it. But we're living in the New Testament age now. We're living in this dispensation of grace, and I'm not going to be asked to do those things. So,
I would quickly respond and say that, first off, how did we know that Abraham was actually hearing the voice of God? Because could that not have been Satan or mental illness? But John quickly had said that, well, what was the outcome, right? I mean, we have to look at this in three parts. There is the command, there is the action to obey, and then there's the outcome. We're not looking at the outcome, we're looking at the obeying, the second part. The outcome, we can look at plenty of other examples, like Jephthah, who was commanded to kill, or didn't command, he made a sacrifice of his young daughter, and God never stopped him, so the outcome is irrelevant, or Moses killing the Midianites, or the Amalekites, or any other innocent child murdering that happened, so, okay.
that's strange, though. You see, you're saying the outcome doesn't matter, and yet this whole evening you've been talking as though you were a consequentialist.
I don't mean
the outcome actually really does matter.
I don't mean the outcome doesn't matter. I mean, what we're looking at, what the questioner was asking was the obeying of the command, which is the second part. Now, obviously, the outcome does matter, but what I'm saying is that's not the questioner's question.
Hi, this question is for Darren. Darren, going back to Abraham, you cited that little story wrong because you didn't put in that Isaac was not sacrificed. You called it child murder, and it wasn't child murder. And you're saying that people who get orders from God just automatically follow them because their belief is so wrong. I'll point out to you that Gideon he didn't test God, he asked for verification. Now, it's explicitly in the Bible that way. So we can ask for verification. We don't just willy-nilly do anything that comes into our mind. And then you ended your statements by calling the Bible a piece of fiction, yet all through your debate you were citing passages
Okay,
of the
well,
Bible
we got to
as
keep this
fact.
to a question.
My question
Okay.
is, where on the Bible does it say fiction? Because my books are classified romance,
Okay.
science fiction, whatever. Where on the Bible does it say fiction? How can you make that claim?
Well, when we look at stories that we outright view as fiction, nursery rhymes and talking animals and all of these different things, we have to make a distinction what coincides with our reality, what coincides with the laws of science, the laws of logic, laws of reality that we have. And if we're going to look at a book and say this is clearly fiction because of the fact that we see talking animals and we see supernatural miracles and claims that have no foundation, then that's where I categorize all of those together in fiction. I mean, if there's some sort of way that we can examine these stories as fact, then I'm okay to do that. But let's see the evidence.
My question was, you were citing the Bible as fact all through the debate, then at the end you called it a piece of fiction.
Okay,
How can
fair
you
enough.
call a piece of fiction fact?
I didn't say it was fact. I'm saying that according to John's worldview, it's fact. So I'm putting on my hat as a theist to adopt his point of view for a moment so that you guys can see how I would address that if I was in that worldview.
Everybody in this room, everybody here has presuppositions. You're walking into any area of investigation already with presuppositions or assumptions that are absolutely immune to revision. Everybody has deeply held beliefs about certain things. And these are the kind of beliefs that you have that will determine what kind of questions you think are worth asking and what actually counts as evidence for anything. Everybody has presuppositions. Now, Darren has presuppositions. His presupposition is Darwinism. So presupposing Darwinism at the beginning of the investigation, he necessarily finds the Bible a piece of fiction. But let's not have any confusion here, guys. This is a faith commitment over here to Darwinism, and he's interpreting all of his experiences through that lens. Okay.
Proof for Darwinism.
There's no proof for Darwinism.
Oh, heck yeah. You can see horses.
Okay,
they-
questions.
If you're going to ask a question, you go ahead.
Questions.
That's the next debate.
I stutter sometimes, so I had to write my question down.
Okay.
And it is aimed at you, John. And it's because Christians are so varied. I'm sorry, but you are. Like, I want to know where you're coming from exactly in your beliefs.
Oh,
So
sure.
If you could just let me get through this and then tell me,
Yeah.
like, where
We have
you
church at
land on
11,
this.
and we have Bible studies on Sunday
do you
evenings.
actually accept that, like, people, human beings, you and me,
Yeah.
had a sense of right and wrong, morality, thousands of years before Christianity existed, and that there are tribes around the world who know nothing of your God, yet have the same moral values as we do? Or do you deny this fact?
I don't deny those. Well, I deny some of what you said.
Okay.
But I have to, again, I'm going to answer as a Christian. The Bible's very clear that everybody has had God revealed to them. In the testimony of, hold on, you're going to let me answer, right?
Deny my existence right there.
Yeah, I'm going to answer your
I
question.
begged to believe as a child. I begged.
Okay, well,
Excuse me, no statements. He
Yeah, this
hasn't
is-
answered the question.
Denying my existence.
Wow,
I
you're-
find that
okay, that's
incredible.
very
I don't deny your existence, you're
yeah.
denying mine.
Well, you're denying me the right to answer your question.
ahead and answer.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
Automatically, you're denying my existence in your answer. So please continue.
yeah, if you don't interrupt me, I will. All right. So the Bible says that God has revealed himself very clearly in the heart of every human being immediately. He's also given you ample evidence of his existence in the created order and in your moral sensitivities. Now, I would say if you really believe that you don't believe in God, you are self-deceived.
Wow.
And that's what the Bible says.
Wow.
Yeah.
In
All right,
terms
have a
of,
good night.
I had a slide about this actually. So, and I hope that we don't get too emotionally charged, guys. You know what?
Mm-hmm.
I hope that we don't get too emotionally charged. I know that these questions are big questions, guys. We're talking about morality and the way to treat each other. John and I have a great relationship, and we want to keep it that way. You guys have been so pleasant in inviting me back here for a third debate. So I wanted to thank you guys as a congregation. You guys have treated me amazing. I lost my train of thought there. I had a slide that kind of addressed this, where when we say as atheists that we don't believe in God, it's a scientific fact that we don't. We're not suppressing something. You guys can go find the scientific journal. I'll gladly provide it for you guys that says that is something that we aren't suppressing. We truly believe that.
I have a question for Darren. It's about secular ethics. If 10 people were on a desert island and there's no foreseeable rescue, and 9 of the people decided that one of them should die, because they snore really loud, and it makes everything miserable. In a way, they're in their own little section, their own little world. Is it now morally okay for them to do that? And if it is, explain that, and if not, please explain that.
That's a really out there question. I think snoring loud, I don't know if that's justification for, but again, we're coming back to the idea of situational ethics, which I think is extremely important because each situation is different. So we need to judge. I mean, do we have all the variables in place? Is there enough food on this island? Is there enough water on this island? Is there some sort of rivalry? I mean, is there a chance of rescue? There's so many things that we need to take into account. If it's just simply somebody snoring, I would say no. Why? Because if we are to play the veil of ignorance and say I'm going to draw, and let's say I just happen to be that person, which I will announce that I do snore. So if I happen to be that person, I don't want to be murdered simply because of that, and that affects my well-being and survival.
Well, obviously, I think it would be horribly immoral to kill a person for snoring. And I'll give you a reason, because people are image bearers of God, and that's the reason why I believe in the death penalty. Now, the Bible says it. In the image of God, God has made man, so whoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. Because we are important to God. We are not just another animal on this planet. And we have a future promised us that no animal is being promised. So.
Hi, John.
Hi. Thanks for coming.
Yeah. So I grew up Christian. I'm actually Darren's sister. We grew up Christian, going to Catholic school, and I still do believe in God. I think what I struggle with, and coming to these debates, always learning more, is really great from hearing both sides. Why was it ever okay for God to ask to kill or enslave people no matter what time of history? And how was this a good act?
Yeah, I think you got to understand, the Bible gives us a real picture, a real panoramic view of earth and human history, from the creation all the way through to the eternal state. And what God created was very good. According to the Bible, it was very good. Everyone was walking in harmonious love relationship with each other and with God. There was no death, there was no slavery, there was no bloodshed, no sickness, disease, or natural disaster. That's what you get when you read Genesis, okay? And that was all entrusted to our first human parents. And they willfully rebelled against God. And so God cursed the world. He's showing all of humanity now that there's something very wrong here. Pain is teaching us that there's something wrong. Pain in your body shows there's something wrong, and you go looking for a solution, okay? So after Adam and Eve fell and put the whole created order into a kind of a chaos, not a total chaos because God is still controlling what's happening, nothing is functioning the way it's supposed to. Romans chapter 8 in the New Testament explains this. The whole creation groans and travails together in pain until now. So God cursed the order to teach us that there's something wrong here, that we need to go looking for him, look for the Savior, look for the one who's the solution to the problem. I think, to tell you the truth, I think a lot of what we're contending with on the earth right now and back then is to keep us so busy just surviving that we can't be as evil as we otherwise would be, in my opinion. But I mean, that's a huge question you asked me, and I have to give you a soundbite answer, but I mean, you know where I live. Come to the church sometime, or email or call, and we can really explore this in much greater detail. But that's the best I can do here, sitting in this chair, right?
I don't personally feel that that necessarily answered the question. But in quick rebuttal, the idea is, I think what she's asking is that, well, how is there ever a point in time where things like murdering somebody for being homosexual, or for picking up sticks on the Sabbath, or any of these heinous crimes, eating shellfish or whatever, how are these ever, at any point in time, morally unacceptable? To the point that we command murder for doing these things. If God is unchanging in his laws and his ways, then how is there a point in time where we can't even answer the question why? Where I stated earlier, we have to answer the question, why is something bad? If we can't answer why eating shellfish isn't bad, then at some point in time, why was it commanded to be bad? But let's move on.
We could talk more about that.
Sure.
For sure.
Let's do it.
Yeah, maybe.
The shellfish debate.
Okay.
Hi, John. Thanks for
hard, I
having
think.
us here. I take issue with your characterization of downtown. I grew up on Home Street, and my parents.
Oh,
deal
I grew
with
up in
it.
Elmwood. I know. Yeah.
So I hope you've read books that didn't make it into the Bible, in particular the Infancy Gospel of Thomas. So my question is, was Jesus always moral, even as a child?
Yeah, I think classic Christian theology recognizes that Jesus was not only sinless, but he's impeccable. He's unable to sin because of his divine nature. So yes, Jesus always was moral, 100% moral, never did sin, and that makes him the appropriate sacrifice for me and you. When he died on the cross, he was sinless, and he took our sins in his body on that tree.
Killing people is sinless.
No, hold on a second. God is the creator of life, right?
So
Hold
he
on a
can-
second.
he can take life.
God is right. God is sovereign over life. God created life. He determines when life ends. You don't. You're a creature. He's the creator. Correct?
So if a parent, let's say, created a child, do they have the right to take that?
Parents
child
don't
away?
create children.
Okay. All right. That's new to me. But
This world is under the sovereign control of God.
So what if Satan created a human being? Could he kill him then? Would that be morally
I don't think Satan has the
good?
power to do that.
Well, I'm just asking, hypothetically.
What kind of nonsense question
Because
is
now
that?
we're saying that God,
Hold on a
everything
second.
that God could,
In the very nature of the case, a human being is an image bearer of God. Why would Satan create a human being? I don't think he could.
I'm just saying you're taking the word good and you're hijacking it for your own means to
Well,
say
you
that anything that God commands is good, whether it's good or not. The most heinous thing can be good if God just commands
Right.
it, even if there's no justification.
Right. So there you're using words like good. You're trying to use it in a moral sense, but you can't account for that. You're talking about heinous, justice, equality, all those things that have no place in your metaphysics. It's really weird. That's what we've been seeing all night. He has basic metaphysical commitments that cannot in any way account for these values that he wants to talk about tonight, like justice and love and equality and such things as that. So I hope that's really come clear tonight. I hope that's really been understood. Oh, Pat, it's so good to see you. I'm glad you came today. This is going to be hard, isn't it?
Oh, I don't know.
Okay.
Subjective moral values or moral laws are usually defined as decided by societies, groups of people, times, places. When you were talking to Darren there, you said the Mosaic Law was for a special time, a certain place. Most of the Mosaic laws, I would hope almost all the Mosaic laws, we don't consider moral now. So therefore, as I understand it, God is using subjective moral values and not actually the author of objective moral values. How is God's subjective moral values different from subjective moral values?
I'll try to understand everything you just said. God's the boss. He made the world.
So might makes right.
No, but he's also morally perfect. God's nature is to love. That's his character. God is loving by nature and just. So he says, here we got a bunch of depraved people.
I have to interrupt you there though for a second, and I won't go on
Yeah.
too long. But you can't make those moral judgments because you just said you can't. You can't judge if God is good or bad. It's revealed to you somehow.
Yeah, in that book right there called the Bible, that's God's word. So
you
God
can't
talks to
actually
me.
make that judgment.
I'm not making a judgment, Pat. I'm believing what the competent authority has told me. God has the supreme right to be obeyed and believed. You don't have that right. I don't have that right, but God does. That's my worldview. It's at least consistent, not like what I'm hearing here from the atheists. So anyway.
So you see no difference between subjective moral values
That's it for the
and
question there, sir.
subjective moral values that God has.
God's moral values are objective. They can be expressed in different divine commands for different people groups, different ages. Well, I just gave you, Pat, a whole spattering of verses from the New Testament that tells us that the Mosaic Law is set aside. That's from the same book. Were you asleep when I showed that?
Really basically, if you have a set of laws that God
Yeah,
has authored in the past,
yeah.
and another God or the new God or
The same God, yeah,
well, the Son of the God,
yeah.
a new set of laws that overrules that, then you have changed the rules over time to fit the society. That's subjective.
That's not subjective.
Maybe just really quickly, what we'll do is because we have a few more questions and we're starting to run out of time.
All right.
Maybe what we can do is just if you guys can ask your question and then just maybe take a seat so we don't have follow up.
That's good.
That might be a little bit quicker and we can wrap these last questions up here.
Hi, Darren. My name's Mitchell, and I had a question. What is truth?
What is truth?
Yes.
Truth is that which corresponds with reality.
Okay. So in order to determine what is real, would you agree that you use your senses?
Mostly, yes.
Do you believe that there are people on this planet who have invalid reasoning?
Absolutely.
Okay, would it follow that those people don't know that they are such people?
For sure.
How do you know you're not one of those people?
We all have to come to we all have to come to a foundation together. I mean, when we come to an agreement on what we agree with our senses, then we can come together and we can say, yes, people are reasoning validly, people are either insane or not sane validly, because we come together and we agree that this is the case.
Yeah, there's a real problem with this kind of common sense foundationalism that you're espousing here. Good philosophers throughout the ages have recognized that empiricism always collapses into skepticism, and rationalism always collapses into arbitrariness. And these are the big problems in philosophy. Now, the Christian has an answer for these things. It's just that the atheist doesn't like the answer. But that was our first debate. But anyways.
Was.
Yeah. Okay. Hello there.
You, John. This is not about beliefs themselves, but the application of them. You contrast secularism with Christianity as if secularist governments are missing Christianity and require it as a core part of how they work. Are you therefore not advocating theocracy, and how do you respond to that?
Yeah, when it comes to complicated political philosophy and things like that, I don't have a whole lot of answers. If I was running for office, I think I would try to get better educated in political philosophy and so on. But I'll just say this. I think our secular governments, like our government right now and others, I think they're still operating, globally speaking, not bad. That they're doing this in spite of their professed atheism. They're doing this because they are image bearers of God, and they do have an inbuilt sensitivity to God's moral commands, God's moral values. And so they're making, for the most part, good and just laws. But you see, the further they're getting away from our Christian foundation, the worse it's going to get around here. That I'm 100% sure of. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we could talk some more about that sometime. We could have a real good discussion, I think. Hey, Neil, it's good to see you, man. God bless.
Can I ask you both a different question?
I don't mind.
Looks like we got time for 3 more there, so.
Okay, let's
Okay. Also, I just want to thank you guys for doing this, because it's always hard to put yourself up there and have people, jab you with questions. Okay, so for John, my question is, you set up objective as being outside of humans in terms of truth. So you were saying that objective is defined through...
Apart from human opinion is what I said.
Apart from human opinion.
Right,
so
yeah.
it's set out by God.
On my worldview, yeah.
The objective ahistorical truth.
Right.
Right. Would you say that humans have the workings to determine value on those objective truths?
Moral value? I'm just not sure, Neil. I know that according to the Bible, God has put his moral laws in our hearts. That's Romans 2:14 and 15. So God has given us a sensitivity to God's moral standards and commands. It's inbuilt. It's in our consciousness. And we do come into the world fully equipped by God with the requisite rational and cognitive faculties, proper epistemic equipment, to reach many true conclusions so that we can drive a car and balance a checkbook and so on. But these are all gifts from God.
Okay, so yeah, that's what I want to know. So you do think we have the moral workings to place our own valuations on things?
I think so, but there's a real temptation and a real, because we're sinful creatures, we're not morally perfect anymore, there's always selfishness that comes in and a lack of insight, wisdom, knowledge, understanding that causes us to go horribly wrong sometimes. And I think the cure here is to at least acknowledge that our moral compass comes from God. At least acknowledge him. And on my worldview, you can talk to him. You can pray and you'll get some direction.
Okay, so I guess this is my final question for you is, if we are all built with that moral value system, that the disagreement that you have over here, how do you reconcile that as a Christian?
Well, I think in terms of leading what we would I think most of us would consider to be a moral and upright and respectable life, I think Darren and I, we could agree on 99% of that. You know, you shouldn't lie to people, and you shouldn't, murder people and so on. Don't go around raping and pay your taxes and all that. I think we agree to that. The difference is I can offer something that looks like a real foundation
Hey,
for what we're
John.
doing.
Do churches pay taxes?
Right, right now we get a tax break because we're.
Okay, so that's pretty good. That's 99%. Anyway, that's
I think,
all I
yeah,
really wanted
but
to know.
we see. I just want the atheists to acknowledge, and I think this is the reason why God's not happy with their lives, because they won't glorify God. They won't acknowledge Him as the one who gave them the ability to reason properly or to make proper moral evaluation.
Okay. And sorry, what was your name again?
I'm Darren.
Darren. Sorry, I'm just terrible with names. Okay. So when you're talking about the veil of ignorance, you're talking from a Rawlsian point of view, right? Yeah. Okay. So from the Rawlsian point of view, and if you're also speaking from a Darwinian point of view, in our current condition, if someone has much more than you, let's say the Walton family, which owns like what 30 to 40% of the wealth in America, what would be your argument that we deserve to be equal and they don't deserve to have as much and to take so much from the rest of us?
Well, I don't know that. I mean, obviously there's people that are born into wealth, but I think that wealth is a magnifier of who you are. I mean, it's a magnifier of if we look at some people that are born into wealth, they do atrocious things, and I can agree that those are bad actions. But there are people that are either born into wealth or work for their wealth and have done amazing things. So I mean, wealth isn't necessarily a good or bad thing. It's what we do with that wealth. Like I pointed out Warren Buffett there and all the charities that he's supported and the good works that he's done. According to John, he's going to be burning in hell for eternity because of the life that he led, just because he didn't believe in an idea, which again, belief is not a choice.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. Can I just respond to that? I thought we were responding. Okay. That guy, if he's in hell, he's in hell not because he did good things on the earth. It's because he rejected God. That's why he went to hell.
Didn't believe in
and
idea,
the other guy, and
but
you said
belief is not a choice, John.
Yeah, according to the Bible, it is,
No, it's
and
not.
I'm going to side with the Bible.
The Bible's wrong then.
Every time. Okay, Darren said so. Everybody, the Bible's wrong.
So are the 5 billion people on earth who don't believe in God? People like Hindus, Sikhs,
Well,
Islam,
they're not
Muslims.
secular.
But that's not my question. That's not my question.
Yeah.
My question is because you are a Christian and you believe that God gave up His only begotten Son, Jesus, to atone for our sins.
Yes.
So what happened 2 days after? He rose from the tomb, and He went to heaven, right? Jesus is not burning in hell right now, right?
No.
Then what did He give up? Then what did He give up? A weekend?
What are you talking about? He endured
Jesus
agony.
died, and then God took Him up to heaven. So what did He sacrifice? What exactly did Jesus sacrifice?
He experienced death,
Something we're all going to
separation from God,
experience.
and He bore the sins of the world in His body, and all that means. He suffered. He
So
suffered
if He
a
bore
lot.
all the sins in the world, does that mean we're now sinless?
No,
That'll be the
Jesus
end of the
Christ.
question there.
No.
Oh, that'll be the end of the question.
You asked me a question. Now I want you to hear the
we're
answer.
At the end
Okay?
of our time here.
Jesus died to pay your sin debt and mine. He paid the world's sin debt. Now he's doesn't matter. His blood is sufficient. Now He has provided salvation for you, but you must appropriate that by faith. It's like me putting $1 million in your bank account. I've provided you with a fortune, but it does you no good if you don't go and appropriate that money. That's what Jesus has done for you. If you want to be saved, you want to be forgiven, washed clean, go to heaven.
I disagree because in your worldview, Jesus is still up in heaven commanding you. So that's it. Doesn't sacrifice.
Okay, if you say so, I guess.
Any
Well, that's
response
it.
to that?
I think we can leave it there tonight. I can feel that this is an emotionally charged subject, and
Sure it is.
I'm glad we chose this as a debate topic because this has been something that I've really wanted to spend my time researching, and it's been. I was just telling John this earlier. It's just you can feel it. You can feel it, guys, and I love that because when we talked about the resurrection and the transcendental argument and things, it was good. We got you guys involved, but I feel like you guys are all leaving here thinking, and that's what I hope, and I hope that John feels is the same thing, that we think about these questions, that we feel them, and it's not just something that we're here for an hour or two and we think about once and we move on with our lives. So again, I wanted to thank everybody that put this together, thank everybody for welcoming me and some of the outspoken atheists into the church and the congregation. So just wanted to put that out there and thank you guys for the invitation.
Yes, and I would like to thank both our presenters here, Darren Kay, John Feeks, and the film crew, and thank everybody for coming as well. And, well, except for the one who converted right here on the spot, I think we can all go and enjoy a wide variety of pies. And thank you again all so much for coming.
Very good, yeah. Thank you, Darren.
God bless you.